kita. Boleh mula dah ke Jo? Boleh
Boleh.
Okay. Okay, Assalamualaikum, selamat petang, very good afternoon to everybody, and also good afternoon to our speaker, Prof. Hanifa. Okay, today's Tech Talk is on MWA Planning Guidelines and Best Practices Handbook for Water Supply System. This is the handbook that MWA currently sell, and the manual that is very useful to all the water industry.
Sorry, I think Miss Ruby dah terkeluar sekejap ya.
Sorry, that's technical glitch just now. Okay, today's technical talk is on section 25, the topic on asset management system. This will be presented by none other our Vice President, MWA Vice President, Engineer Technologist Haji Muhammad Hanifa bin Haji Abdul Hamid, as in the photo. Okay, Prof. Hanifa is a Vice President of MWA and also a Senior Advisor for Minconsults in Berhad. He has joined MWA quite long ago, if not mistaken, on the 10th of February 1993. He's one of the pioneer members of MWA. Okay, without much ado, I think we'll hand over the floor to Prof. Hanifa to present his topic on asset management system. Please welcome, Prof. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ruby. A very good afternoon to everyone, and may peace be upon every one of us. First of all, I'd like to thank MWA to invite me to actually present a talk on asset management systems. And the topic today will be, based on the MWA Planning Guidelines and Best Practices Handbook for water supply system. I'll elaborate a little bit on this handbook. In the picture there is a picture of myself, got MWA logo, and that's my trademark HH, Hanifa Hamid. The blue is water, and of course the gold is water is gold. So if you recognize these books, and for those of you who have not got a copy of the book, I think it's worthwhile using this book as just as a guide, as a reference. This is MWA publication on Planning Guidelines and Best Practices Handbook for the water supply systems. And this book is compiled based on a real industry experiences. There are close to about 100 people who actually contributed to the development of this book. Of course, there's many cross-references from international publication and also local practices. If you recognize the cover, the first publication was in 1994, and it took us about 25 years plus to produce the second publication, because there was not much difference over the last 25 years. But this current book actually includes some new additional technologies, and also design guides for the water supply systems. And as you know, water supply is an Asian technology, and also there's many new topics. The book actually comes in 2 volumes, volume 1 and volume 2. So this is volume 1. Volume 1 consists of about 13 chapters, or we call it section. These are actually quite straightforward, direct application to the water supply system itself. The new added one includes, environmental requirements, and a few others, within the volume 1. Whereas volume 2 has quite a number of new additions, including advanced treatment processes. You've got non-revenue water, you have HAZOPs, you have of course asset management system, which you're going to talk about today, and we've got water recycling, and we also have 4.0. Now, I happen to be the chairman in compiling this guideline, and in the process of compiling, I had to chair so many meetings, getting the inputs from many industrial practitioners. So if you don't have a copy of the book, you can always contact Ruby, our MC for today. I understand Volume 1 has been fully sold off. MWA intends to publish Volume 1 again. Once they publish, they will advertise. But Volume 2, I understand there's still a few more copies left. So hope you can purchase Volume 2. So the topic today I'm going to talk on is Section 25 of Volume 2, which is the asset management system. If you look at the content, both Volume 1, Volume 2 together, there's about 700 over pages. Asset management only covers pages 317 to 322. There's about 6 pages. But for those who are the lucky ones today attending my talk, I've prepared quite a detailed slide. I'm not only talking about, the book actually tells about what is asset management, but I'm going to also talk about how to actually go about doing the asset management. And if time permits, I'm also going to share some real life experiences, in the development of the asset management system itself. So I consider you lucky, although the number of participants is small. I understand because of the long Chinese New Year holidays and tomorrow being a public holiday, a lot of people are actually still on leave. But that's where you get the bonus today of those who are attending, will actually get the opportunity to get much more detailed background of how to develop an asset management system, much more than what is actually in the Volume 2. So I begin with why asset management. Of course, the word asset itself, we have to actually clearly understand. And of course, management is the total managing of the asset itself. Asset here refers to physical assets, and most of the time, now if you just look around where you live, you see a lot of assets. You see the trees, you see the drains, you see the roads. You have to ask the question, are these assets managed properly? I think you will get a very quick answer that, the drains are always clogged, so it's not managed properly. The trees are not pruned properly, they're not managed properly. The roads, you see a lot of potholes everywhere. No, that is what you see but there's so many things to asset management. And today, most of the public assets, are actually managed on an ad hoc basis. They lack data on the information of the asset itself. There's a lot of wish lists involved. There's a lot of firefighting in actually managing the asset. So asset management is about creating a proper inventory, doing a condition-based assessment. Condition means, looking at the capability and the capacity of the asset itself, looking at the risk associated to the asset, looking at the failures, and also, the actions required, looking at the life of the asset itself, looking at the replacement, looking at the repairs, looking at the performance level, criticality, and also the whole life cycle. So basically, why asset management is it actually offers systematic decision making for effective works program, for optimal and economical operation and maintenance, to minimize risk and impact of asset failure onto the stakeholders, for a focused allocation of resources, and also for transparency on the OPEX and the CAPEX costs. So hence, you need to actually have a clear asset management program. So asset management is important. It is concerned with creating, managing, renewing physical assets throughout their economic life. Physical assets are defined as anything related to economic and social infrastructure of an organization or a nation. In our case, I mentioned to you a few very quick examples, like just now, roads, drainage, trees, and so on. And it's also very important, the whole life management of the physical asset, and it's becoming one of the more important corporate skills in recent decades. Now, if you look around, all the local authorities, all the agencies who are actually dealing with assets, whether it's railways, whether it's ships, whether it's ports, whether it's airports, whether it's power, they are all full of assets. They have a lot of assets, including our industry, the water industry. Now, how do you manage these assets? So the topic today is actually we'll be going through in very detail, on the steps, looking into a decent asset management process. So asset management capability lies very much with the organizational strategies, with investment and decision making. If you take a small local authority, say Majlis Perbandaran Batu Pahat or what, under the Majlis, there's so many assets for them to look at. So the organization strategies, and with their limited funds, they have to actually organize so the right funding and the right attention will go to the right assets. Also, the allocation of substantive amounts of finance into the management of the physical asset over time, leveraging upon operational knowledge. So all these assets, someone have to manage it, someone have to operate it, and someone have to be the custodian or the caretaker. Now, if you don't have that operational knowledge, contractors just build and they leave it to someone to operate and maintain. So that's where the whole life asset management is actually very important. So simply put, asset management answers the question as to why we are investing in these physical assets and for what purpose and over what timelines. So that is in a nutshell, in a very brief form, why we actually require asset management. So the definition of asset management comes in many forms. The simplistic form is, it is a systematic and coordinated series of activities within an organization that enables the management of its assets for optimal and sustainable outcomes and long-term benefits. This is the simplest definition of asset management. Now, these activities evolve over the asset's life cycle and is associated with the performance, risk, and expenditure for the purpose of achieving strategic organizational goal. This also has been recognized as an international definition. Now, what is the international definition? I share one. If you look at this slide here, PAS asset management definition. PAS stands for publicly available specification. This is part of in the UK, in Britain, when they develop standards, just like our Malaysian standards, they start with what is called a PAS, publicly available specification. So this specification has been around for many years, and they call it PAS 55. So PAS 55 has been adopted as the basis for managing asset. This standard is the international reference standard for optimal management of physical assets, providing the definition of good practice in the whole life management of the asset. It is applicable to any organization. Again, I repeat, any organization. It can be hospitals, it can be railways, it can be power plants, it can be water companies, it can be wastewater companies, it can be a local authority, So it is applicable to any organization where physical assets are key or critical factor in achieving its business goals. Now, if the local authority can't look after the drains, it has failed in its business goals. So likewise, any other organization. So the primary consideration of PS 55 is to align all asset-related businesses, processes towards the end goal of the organization. So beginning 2015, PS 55 has been replaced with an ISO system. which is called ISO 55,000. So Malaysia, not many companies have achieved ISO 55,000 as yet. One of the two first companies who have actually obtained ISO 50,000 in Malaysia is the two big utility companies, Tenaga Nasional and Indah Water Consortium. Later on, if time permits, I'll go into some examples of, how we go about, obtaining this ISO 55,000. I think every water company in Malaysia need to at least have this as a best practice, ISO 55,000, just like your ISO 9,000, ISO 45,000, ISO 14,000, 18,000, I think 55,000, if you're a utility company, asset-based company, it is very, very crucial for you to actually, get into this, not I also, but ISO, because this will actually discipline the organization, in managing the assets. So the ISO 55,000 defines asset management system as a set of interrelated or interacting elements to establish asset management policy. I'll talk about what is a policy, asset management objectives, also touch on what is an objective, and also processes to achieve those objectives. It is based on a set of fundamentals involving asset value, alignment, leadership, and also assurance. So basically, asset management is about systematic and coordinated activities, practices through which an organization optimally and sustainably manages its assets and asset systems associated with the performance, risk, and expenditure over the life cycles for the purpose of achieving its organizational strategic plan. Now, very often we hear about business plan. In many of the utility-based company, they have already moved from business plan to asset management plans. There are many participants here from Laku and also from Syarikat Melaka and so on. I think you're very familiar with actually developing a business plan. Moving into an asset management plan will be a bonus in actually enhancing that said business plan. If you look at the UK, the UK water industry regulated by Ofwat, they now use AMP as their business plan, asset management plan, or AMP, and today they are in AMP 7, asset management plan 7, and each of the asset management plan is a 5-year plan. In the 5 years, say the government say these are what is required for the water supply or the water resources or the sewerage sector, then Ofwat as a regulator will actually put up basic targets which the water companies have to actually fulfill. And the water companies will actually deliver their business plan, which is called the asset management plan, to Ofwat for scrutiny, and then it will be taken up if it is linked to policy issues and also linked to the tariff structure. It will be taken up to the government for the endorsement. So everything is structurally controlled, and every details are there in the asset management plan. So going into ISO 55,000 on asset management is actually a right step moving forward. For consultants who are actually involved with many of the utilities, be it the railways or the power or whichever sector, getting into specializing asset management system, it is good. In Malaysia, not a single consultant is actually an expert in asset management system. If you look in the international market, the big consultants like Arup and so on, they are really specialized on asset management, and they provide this as a service to many local authorities, organizations, utilities, and so on. You will understand better when I go into detail on the processes of the asset management itself and why it's linked to the business plan. So just sit back and imagine you are actually answering these 7 key questions on assets. You know, you look at yourself as an individual. You own surely some houses, maybe a few cars, and any other thing which you asset. So you just imagine while I read out the question, you just imagine whether you can relate those questions to your personal assets itself. Personal assets, I mean like a car or a house, you know. Now, do you know what are your assets? Of course, your personal one, very straightforward. I have 1 car, I have 2 cars, I have 1 house, you know, things like that. No? But if you ask this question to, say, Laku, I know a lot of participants here are from Laku, you know, and Syarikat Melaka. Do you know your assets? Then you start, the question become more complicated, more detailed, and there's a lot of things. You might answer it to 70 or 80%, but to achieve the 100%, that's why you need a proper asset management program and a process. You know? Do you know where are your assets? So this one again, you know, where's your car? You know where's your car. Where's your house? Of course you know. Do you know where are all the manholes? You know. Do you know where are all the valves in your catchment? You know. Then the next question, if you ask, do you know the condition of your assets? All the nitty-gritty of your assets, do you know the condition or not? So the valve, what is the condition of the valve? What is the lifespan? Or what is the current capability? What's the residual life, you know? So that's the third question. Do you know the value of your assets? Very often, you know, most of the utilities, they know the value of asset at a very high level, but most of the assets are really not tagged to the real asset value, which warrants it to be in the book value. You know? So again, I will actually expand on how to value these assets, and how to actually there's many methods in doing asset valuation. Of course, in subsequent talks, when you go into detail, so all these individuals will be individual topics. They can be very, very comprehensive. Do you know the cost to maintain your assets? Very often, we go and ask for tariff increment. We do all the financing, and we know what is the cost to maintain the assets. But the detailed asset maintenance cost will go right to the equipment cost. This is where the asset management will really help to actually correlate. And when you present it to any auditors, any decision makers, you got a very structured way to actually justify yourself. What is the maintenance cost, and do you know the lifespan of your asset? Because every physical asset has a lifespan, just like every human being. There's a lifespan. And these assets needs to be either upgraded, refurbished, or to be replaced. And this is where this question is very important. The lifespan of the asset, and are you prepared for the refurbishment? Are you prepared for the replacement? Are you prepared for the repairs and so on? And of course, do you know the future asset requirements? So if you are managing a big railway business, you know, in automation and so on, do you know what are the future requirements of your asset itself? So if you can answer these 7 questions with 100% full mark, then you are at the top notch. Even if you get 90 and above, you are the top notch utility or the top notch organization in the country. If you ask these questions to many organizations, I bet many of them will score 50% and below. So here's a snapshot of an infrastructure as an asset. So if you take the economics of the infrastructure, the infrastructure need to create wealth, and the wealth needs to be distributed. It needs to be managed and needs to be renewed through time. There will be assets which will degrade and become obsolete. So you need to actually think about it. And also, you have to actually look at global trends in managing the assets. things like privatization of public assets and so on. So if you look at, as an example, transport industry, the assets within the transport industry, you got the rail industry, you got the road industry, you got the airports, you got the harbors, ports and so on. So if you take a simple one, like roads, highways, and roads can be under the concessionaires, it can be under the JKR, it can be under the local authorities, it can be under rural ministry, can be under FELCLA. So all these organizations need to have a proper asset management on its roads. So you don't need people to tell you there's a pothole in this road. The moment there's a pothole, you will know where is the pothole, and you will actually have a plan to actually patch it up very quickly. Last time, when you started, when I started work, I used to work with the City Hall of Kuala Lumpur, and I used to look after the KL infrastructure. KL infrastructure includes everything: roads, drainage, walkways, footpaths, bridges, And one of my main job early in the morning is, this is those days, early in the 80s, the mandos, the mandos will come to the office with a long list of pothole, because their job in the evening is to just, the job of the mando is just drive around the KL city and pick up all the potholes. So early in the morning, I have to just sign it off, and then he will take one lorry load with 2 or 3 workers and travel all around the places and just patch up. So without public complaining, they get all the potholes patched up. Today, we have also so many things, the authorities also don't know where the potholes are. After 10 or 20 times complaint, you will be lucky if you get it patched. So clearly, there's a sign of failure in proper asset management. Likewise, the railways, the ports, the airports. I think if you go to all these facilities, you can see a lot of I think recently when the new Minister of Transport came into office, the first thing is he walked through all the stations, the LRT stations, and he came out with a list of the 300 over escalators not working, 200 over lifts not working, things like that. If only they had a proper asset management, I'm sure they don't need the minister to go and pick up all these sort of things. So if you look at, these are very focused business. If you look at partially focused businesses, it involves like housing, industrial estate, healthcare. You go to the hospitals, you can see, some of the hospitals are actually, is actually very poorly managed in terms of asset management. You can see the buildings, you can see the drains, you can see the equipments, and so on and so on. So there's a lot in these areas, and these are potential businesses for people who actually specialize in this field of asset management. Of course, you go to education, the schools, the universities, somewhere you go. If you look at process-focused industries like oil and gas, waste disposal, they are actually much more organized. And like I mentioned just now, Tenaga Nasional was one of the first. Actually, Indowater was the first, I think. Then they went into, because Tenaga went on power stations, and then they went into the organization, whereas Indowater went into the organization itself. I will go into the details on how to go about it, but today's topic is on water. Asset management related to water. While we have some guidelines and some companies have actually started, and they are at various stages, but overall, I still feel there's a lot of room for improvement in asset management for the water companies. So what are the principles of asset management? The first is optimization over its whole life cycle. And then there must be a clear line of sight between the organization's strategic direction and the day-to-day activities of managing the assets. And then, the principle of single source of truth. today you're going to ask the asset information. MWA just published the water industry guide, where it has a lot of information on the assets. For us to actually compile that guide, it's actually quite a mammoth task. Although we get a lot of feedback from the water companies, a lot of details are actually, still not there. We hope in another 5 to 10 years time, the water industry guide will be, because to the final stakeholders, the single source of truth is very, very important. I mentioned just now, the very simplistic example is, of course, the road and the pothole. So if you go to a Majlis Bandaraya Petaling Jaya and say, how come the pothole is not fixed, then they'll start looking at which road, which lane, which, and they don't have the full data. They rely so much on the public complaints rather than their own structured management. And the buy-in must be from the top management. You cannot start asset management from the bottom. It has to be from top down. And this is one exercise that the C-levels have to be involved. Even the board of the companies have to be involved in actually driving. That's why you look at a lot of the UK water companies. They very much depend on their asset management plan as their business plan. And then these plans have to be continually improved, reviewed, and it should be visible on asset information, at least for all the stakeholders and the relevant to the asset management activities like the regulators and so on. So the 7 key principles of asset management is it has to be holistic, it has to be systematic, it has to be systemic. There's a difference between systematic and systematic. Systematic is more on the processes. Systemic is actually the system. It should be system driven. And it should be risk-based, has to be optimal, and it needs to be sustainable and must be integrated. Now, some has part of this, but the overall principle, you have to actually have equal scores on all of this to be a complete asset management company. So there's actually 2 parts to asset management. One is the asset itself. The next is the system. So the asset is the identification of the asset. Just now I said the car. If you take a car as your asset, of course, you've got a car. But, within the car, if you go into the details, the bolts and nuts and all other related things, the engines and so on, then your inventory is incomplete. That's why sometimes you always get a breakdown, which is not expected. Suddenly it's a breakdown. So if you're running a utility company, identification of the asset, classification of the asset based on the identification is important, and then from that you have to characterize the assets based on the classification. I'll go into details of this later on. As for the system, is how do you actually evaluate the asset, how do you actually do the projection for the asset itself, and use that as a decision-making tool. And these are some diagrams which is actually in volume 2, which you can read, but these are just examples, simplistic, because in volume 2 we have not gone into detail. There will be a publication hopefully later on water asset management, systems, probably by MWA, maybe in some time from now, But suffice in volume 2 to say what is asset management and the importance of asset management. That's what you have in volume 2. But today's talk, as I mentioned, you're quite lucky. I'm going to take you through in actually how to go about doing asset management. So if you look at the hierarchy of asset management, you always start from, although I mentioned just now, is top driven from top down, but the down has to be very strong. The asset data is very, very crucial for asset management. So there's the pillar, there's the foundation, And in asset data, you need to actually compile all the details, you start with a simple asset database and you start building it up. You need to have copies of the drawing, whether it's hard copy. You start with the hard copy because most of the utility, they have hard copies. If you go back to DBKL and say, can you give me a copy of all the drawings of the drains in KL? Probably you'll get about 15% of the real drawings, because many of it was built over 100 years of DBKL. So the old ones, they have to actually rebuild again. So this is part of data building up. You have to do the survey, you have to build up, and you have to have the as-built drawings, and you build up from there. And then there's a verification exercise. So that's the basis in the hierarchy of asset management. Then you have the basic, so you get asset information system, I call it MIS, and a system called MIS, which is Asset Management Information System. And then we link that up to the GIS, because there's a lot of linear assets in the utilities, the sewer lines or the pipelines in water and so on. So you always have to link the asset information with the GIS system, and you have to have a proper document management system. So this is the next crucial hierarchy in beginning your asset management journey. And then you have the decision-making tools. You have various models, various financial model or planning model, or a capital works program model. You have a risk management model. You have an integrated GIS system, and many of the GIS are now also linked to BIM, building information modeling system. So all these decision-making tools must be in place in your journey. Of course, finally, you will get a proper asset management system, which is effective management of the assets, including risk management and with whole life optimization. So in very simplistic form, this is the hierarchy of asset management system. As for the water, I think we already have enough supporting legislative start off, although it's not exclusively mentioned as asset management in VCR or whatever, but the clauses actually in VCR are the enablers moving towards a proper asset management. The role of SPAN under Act 654, not 655, 654 is SPAN Act, under clause 15, the regulator is to ensure national development goals. How do you actually ensure national development goals? How do you ensure national water development goals? How do you actually ensure national sewerage development goals? One of the driving point is to have a proper asset management plan, and also to ensure long-term sustainability of that services also should be driven by a proper asset management plan. If you look at the VCR Act for the role of the facility licensee, there's many clauses, but I only picked up these three clauses, section 31, 34, and 35. Everything is actually related to asset and the well-being and the well-keeping of the asset. Likewise, for the service licensee, section 31(3) and also 34, it also talks about maintaining at all times the security, integrity, and the safety of water and sewerage assets. So I think there's already enough enablers to ensure that the assets needs to be properly maintained. And one of the tools to maintain these assets is through a proper asset management system. So asset management is basically a tool for the water industry, the sewerage industry, and all the water utilities. So what are the water assets? I think this is a famous diagram. This is the famous diagram of a simplistic view of the water assets. There's two parts. One is the source and also the treatment and the distribution. So one of the key assets of the water is, of course, the dam itself. Who manages the dam? What are the components of the dam? how critical is the dam, what is the lifespan of the dam, and capability and the capacity and so on. Then you have the intake points. Then you have the treatment plants, because then you have the balancing reservoir, you've got the trunk mains, you've got the service reservoir, you've got the distribution mains, and of course, up to the consumer. So if I list down, what are the water asset at the very, very high level, this is not going to the equipment level yet, at a very high level. The main ones are the dam, the intake stations, the headworks, the treatment plants, the pumping station, the unit processes within a treatment plant, the pipelines, the reservoirs, the balancing tanks, the equipments. Equipments will be thousands and thousands of equipments. When I started off asset management for indoor water, we started with very basic information, and today we have records of thousands of equipment. Thousands mean by 100 or thousands equipment, and the conditions we know. We know when is the usable or effective lifespan, and we know what's the time for replacement, including the movable assets such as lorries, vehicles, the time to replace the tires, time to replace the brakes, everything. We need to also take into account all the spares, the spare parts, the fittings, the vehicles, the offices, the labs, the workshops, and the human capital, because all this asset, as part of the asset management, human capital is an important component of the asset management system and others. So this is a very high level asset related to water. So some of the immediate data which is required based on the high level is the listing of all the related asset to the business, the grouping of the asset by class and type. You can actually define your own classes and the types, depending on your organization. But you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of international references. There's also local references. You can use that as a guide to start with, on classifying and coming up with the grouping by the type and also by the class. You need to also develop basic asset data sheets, date installed, effective lifetime, etc., etc. Criticality of the asset in relation to the business itself. I'll talk about critical assets later on in the talk. Critical assets are things like, do you know where your critical assets are? If this asset fails, then it will black out the cabinet house or the parliament house. Those are critical assets, for example. So there's many things. So this one you have to give additional attention. How do you do the additional attention? Again, it's a procedure through the asset management. Do you have the maintenance data? For now, to start with, you can use whatever data you have. Performance data, failure, root cause, also water treatment plant static and dynamic critical indices, and also trends. Likewise for the pipes, and also the strategies and so on. All this data, I believe you already have. Most of the companies for the water sector can start. If you don't have, you can also get assistance from experts or from consultants to come in to actually do that job to begin up. For indoor water, we engage Arup from UK to as a facilitator. The best way to start off asset management is to do it yourself, because if you give it to a consultant, tomorrow when you ask where is your asset, the 7 basic questions you will struggle to answer. But if you develop yourself, then it'll be in your fingertips, and when it's in your fingertips, you will manage the asset, at the class 1 level. So what we did last time is, because we are not very familiar with ISO PS 55, not very familiar with ISO 55, and we know that they have a lot of tools and processes there which can expedite. So we engage Arup from the UK to actually come in and facilitate our managers, our downlines, to actually build up, through training, and then they come and they audit. So with that, we know that we are in the right path, and we know, and that's why in record time, we managed to get the ISO 55000 with 0 NCR. when we first applied, and the auditor is no other than SIRIM, you know. So if you know, SIRIM is quite strict, but we went through this process and we got it in the first round, you know, with 0 NCR. That's a great achievement. I'm sure many of the water companies should be able to do it, but if you need guidance, that's why you need to actually engage the expert. You know? So the importance in the water business is, of course, critical for the viability and sustainability of the water and sewerage business, and all values relating. If you know, many of the water companies are struggling. Their tariff is just sufficient to cover all of the O&M or maybe part of the O&M, not sufficient for replacement, not sufficient for new assets, you know, a new capex and so on. So that's where through proper asset management, looking at the overall business itself, you know, it's a very important business tool used to drive, and will be used to drive in the future. No? And all values, including the depreciation, are dealt significantly in through the asset management, process. And this needs to, maintain assets, that are only fit for purpose. So all the extras, redundant assets, I think, we have to actually let go and, in the future, only look at fit for purpose assets for its lifespan, so that it will actually, bind into the, sustainability of the business itself. And also look at degraded assets, lower the value of the company, which we need to look at how to increase, the degraded value of the assets itself. So again, for the water companies, the objectives must be clear. The objective must always be linked to the stakeholder expectation. Stakeholder, includes, all the consumers. Stakeholder, they don't want breakdowns. They don't want water cuts. They don't want polluted water. So by knowing all these assets and in control of all the assets, including the risk management, you will get to manage all the stakeholder expectation, including the regulator, the consumer, and appropriate targets needs to be set. Realign what is already being done. Don't reinvent the wheel. Take into consideration the asset service delivery and also the risk management. Risk management is a very important, crucial component of the asset management itself. And also set various level of the asset management within the organization, at the company-wide, at the district-wide, unit-wide, at the asset level, and also down to the equipment level. So I'll talk a little bit of this later on. When you have an objective, the objective must be clear, and the line of sight also has to be clear, and it has to go down right up to the equipment level. And then the ability to ensure continual improvement, and there must be a smart measurement, a KPI or whatever. Smart means, specific, measurable, achievable, reliable, and also time-based, and be able to be monitored for compliances, complaints, costs, maintenance, and risk. So very often you hear about drains being clogged. So you always wonder, who is the custodian of the drains, within the local authority? Sometimes they say the local authority, sometimes they say this is under GPS, sometimes they say this is under some other agency, So clearly, it's a big failure in asset management in the overall drainage management. That's why sometimes, when you drive along the road during a rainy day, you see the roads are flooded, but the drain is empty. The water cannot drain from the road to the drain. And this is all the flash floods which actually happen, the banjir kilat. Sometimes you really wonder, who is the custodian of all these, And many a times, the current utilities actually rely on complaints to go and resolve it. This is firefighting syndrome, and also a continuous blame game syndrome. Now, if you've been to Dubai, once my niece actually asked a question, he said, "Uncle, how come here, without complaining, the people come and clean the drain, come and repair the drains, come and patch up the roads, come and do a lot of things, you know. But here we have to call 10 times and they never come. They come and prune the trees, you know, without telling, you know. The signboard is being blocked. They come and clear, you know, the branches, you know. But in Malaysia, you have to complain a lot. Clearly, there's a gross lack of asset management in many organizations, and that's why asset management is very, very crucial. And we hope that, you know, the, you know, people who actually get into understanding asset management will be a contributor to actually developing the asset management going into the future. So key features of good asset management is to collect, store, and analyze good quality data, identify the drivers, develop decision-making framework based on the asset with clear and ambiguous rules. And finance is very, very important, tied to the asset with great knowledge of the technical details. And implement a clear program, whether it's an operational program or maintenance program or capital program with a clear policy. And this thing needs to be revised continuously. So if you are in ISO 55000, then the ISO itself being audited twice a year or maybe once a year, and it's also audited at the company level, at the operations level by the units. If you're in the case of Indawater, because it's a national company, the case of Tenaga Nasional, it's a national company, they check the corporate side. They select, the auditor will select, okay, today I want to audit, this year I want to audit Terengganu, next year I will audit Melaka, next year I'll audit another 3, but the audit is picked by the auditor, the audit location is picked by the auditor. So if they pass at random, that means the whole organization pass. But in the case of water companies, it's actually quite straightforward. It's within your state, of course, within your state, they'll have districts, If all your district or units have their own asset management programs, then they don't have to actually audit the entire company. They just pick, okay, today within Melaka, they only audit these 3 districts or 1 district, and that's sufficient with the corporate support. So that's why you have to have this key feature on how you're going to govern the asset management itself. So the asset management strategy must fulfill the purpose shall be to identify, analyze, coordinate, and program the management and improvement strategies for all assets making up the public or the private water systems. The strategy should include identifying stakeholder expectations, identifying all the types and classes which I've mentioned, the risks, and also the strategies moving forward. And these strategies must always be tested using these asset management tools. So in a very simplistic overview, the vision must be clear. Remember, I used the word line of sight. From top down, the operator right at the bottom, including the consumer right at the top, they will know a clear vision of the organization itself, driven by an asset management. The vision is clear: mission, asset management policy, strategy, objectives, and planning. The portfolio of the asset itself, there's a program manager to actually manage high-level operations and also the detailed operations, and also the strategic management of the projects itself. And also it's actually built in a culture within the organization itself. Now, if you can come up with this structure within the organization related to asset, then you're already in the right direction of the asset itself. And all this will actually help in the decision-making framework, in particular the financing of the assets itself. Today you have 10 million. Where do you put the 10 million on? You put the 10 million on one big project, plenty of small things get no attention, and that's why they start deteriorating further and further. So if with that 10 million, you can actually spread, looking at the scoring. I will go into the scoring later on and say, okay, here you put 300,000, here you put 500,000. So overall, you manage the assets, at the optimal level, rather than pumping the 10 million to just one asset and all the rest, not being managed. That's just an example, like I mentioned just now, asset management in, if you go to the UK, the British Rail, although there's a lot of strikes every other day, to me, it is a an example of a public transport. You want to travel anywhere in Britain, you travel using the British Rail. British Rail is one of the first to get ISO 55000 in the UK, and they are very, very. I had a chance to go through and try to understand their asset management program, which today the water companies in the UK are actually, also using that as an example. They go down right up to the details of the rail lines, the sleepers, the bolts and nuts, and so on. And that's why you can see that of course recently we had some LRT failures and so on. You can see the drastic impact to the consumers, the travelers, and not only that, a major impact to the management itself. I'm also part of this transportation group today. I also feel embarrassed, and I have to sit in some committees to actually look at what actually went wrong. Clearly, the asset management would have been a very good tool to actually fix all these issues on the ground. So of course, asset management comes with many challenges, surrounding the stakeholder value, the costing, also the public value. So the one who can actually overcome these challenges lies with the organization itself and the capabilities. You cannot just appoint one manager to be an asset manager and then leave him to do everything to asset. The poor guy cannot make decisions. He cannot get corporations from it. All needs to be, like I mentioned, it's now top driven. The entire organization should believe in this asset management system itself. It has to be interdependent on all the systems itself, like a financial system, your operational system, your complaint system, and it needs to be system driven through engineered solutions, and also everything should be interdependency based on the asset management system. So if you look at the outlook for water industry, you got this regulator, SPAN. SPAN have to provide clear policy direction, goals, and target on asset management on the actual needs. Being an economic regulator, protect the customer as well as the utility itself, and set the right KPIs for the facility licensee and also the service licensee based on their business plan. Now, this is the crucial, the business plan should be clearly supported by a clear asset management plan. This is something which needs to be further improved at the regulatory level. Of course, the facility licensee owning the assets, they need to know the assets in detail. Although some of the assets could be leased to the service licensee, they should not just rely on the feedback from service licensee. They also must have a clear asset management plan so that they know that whether the asset has lived its useful life or whether the operation was not good enough and hence the asset failed, or the operator were too good, they have actually stretched the lifespan of the asset itself. And also then they can determine the funding and the procurement requirements for the upkeep of the by the service licensee. Service licensee asset management is very, very crucial. If you're an operating company, just like the British Rail I mentioned just now, the British Airways, here in Malaysia, Malaysian Airlines, the ports, they are all beginning to move into clear, asset management, tools. So for the operating company, asset management, goes without saying that this is a crucial tool. And once everyone is in the same line of sight, then you can go into a total asset management system where the asset, the operation, the capex, the opex, the asset performance is very interrelated, and hence the decision making on the asset itself including the strategies and the financing, becomes very transparent and very clear. So it is hoped that moving forward, this will be the future drive. So I'm already 1 hour through my talk. I have to go faster now. Many of the companies will start like this, from the current situation, based on their current asset knowledge, their prioritization of the asset and their asset-based organization, they have to list down. This is just an example. Then they have to put up a plan. To me, a 3-year plan is good because I always like to work fast, but a typical company will take up to about 5 years plan. And you have to say that, what is your future plan in 5 years time? That's why in the UK, they got this AMP, as I mentioned just now, today they are in AMP 7, Asset Management Plan 7. For example, DEFRA is the equivalent of the ministry here. DEFRA is Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. They actually set the target. They said there should be, in London, there should be this amount of defense on overflows. That means high level or sea level overflows. Of course, in the UK, of what they also look on the drainage. Here they don't look at the span, don't look at the drainage. So then they set a number of overflows, a number of household complaints. So then Ofwat will translate that into KPI, and then they will translate that into the water companies, who will then come out with the asset management plan. So what we are talking about, asset management plan number 7, is what they're having now. If you Google and see, you can see a lot of targets and KPIs for them to fulfill. And the water companies are actually given incentives. They have something called partnership. They work with in-house consultants and contractors to meet the targets ahead of time. So because there's incentive by the regulator, if they meet the target ahead of time, then they get some incentives. If they miss the target lines, they have penalties. So they are actually driven by these asset management plans. So you need a transition period to get from where we are today to where we want to be. But the first start is have a 3-year plan at least, if not a 5-year plan, and set a target. This is just an example. Risk-based approach, integration of all the within the organization, and also the efficiencies, best practices, how to improve. So this will be a tool to start off, a direction moving forward. So the benefit of asset management system is plenty. I highlight here maybe 3 or 4. One is better knowledge of the assets, the conditions, the risk, performance, and the criticality of the asset itself. Number 2 is all the actions are based on a clear justification. The operation, maintenance, and the capex are aligned to the business needs. The outcomes, it minimize the risk and the impacts on the asset failures. So today we have a lot of public complaints or what, overflows or whatever, contaminated water source. I think all this needs to be, minimized to, proper asset management plan linked to risk, management plans. A focused allocation on the resources and also the transparency on the operating and the capex costs. And more importantly, the result, the outcome, the benefit is you got very safe assets, which are meeting compliances, which have great customer satisfaction, good cost-effective service delivery, and also enhance image of the organization itself. Remember, I shared with you the LRT breakdown. It's just one small system failure, it actually breaks down. The risk is, if that is not fixed, the risk is 2 trains can collide. So the management have to make a decision to stop the services immediately because they didn't know where the problem was. So the decision is to continue to actually allow the train to run while they find out, or make a drastic decision, stop, and then find out. Because the asset management was not comprehensive, they could not pinpoint immediately, so they decided to stop the train. Of course, there was a lot of flack. There was a lot of news, and it actually affects the image of the company. While the company is good, they actually had an issue with this. Moving forward, I think this is the lessons learned, and these are critical businesses. Of course, water is also a very critical business. No? Imagine tomorrow your water source is being contaminated or being cut or affecting businesses, which some businesses, their turnover is in millions in a day. So if you cut the water, the business lose millions in a day. You can be also open to a lot of legal complications in the future. So the benefit of asset management is plenty. And the US EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency, study on effectiveness of asset management in 5 cities in the US and Canada. Summarized below, I just take a summary of what it shows the benefit for the decision makers and of course the politicians, elected officials, and also the managers or the CEOs. They are better positioned, better gut feelings to the knowledge management of the assets, better informed investment decision, and also least expensive approach over long term. For the middle management, knowing the asset condition, they can actually answer whatever queries which comes through, and better communication and better auditing. They are prepared for whatever audits, because of their knowledge of the assets. Of course, the public at large, improve communication, better service delivery, and the staff with increased energy and excitement, because they are motivated. They don't hear so many complaints anymore. So these are 3 countries which have done very well in asset management. If you can always Google Australia, US, and UK, they start some 20 years ago. If I just take UK as an example, the concepts and the framework from the UK local government actually drove the asset management, and that's why the water industry also, through the environmental agency, they call it EA, equivalent to our DOE here, also enforces based on this, asset management records and so on. So it also leads to research used, adopted, which actually improve the overall asset management, and that's why the birth of PAS 55 came about, many years ago, and today they are with ISO 55000. So I'd like to now share a little bit on the roadmap. The purpose of the roadmap is to chart out a staged rollout of various steps involved in attaining the final goal of total asset management, or TAMS I call it. Consolidation of what we have, tasks required, and staging of the tasks. You remember the 2 timelines I showed, the 3 years or the 5 years. You have to put this into your roadmap. Resource required, whether it's system, the data, the manpower, and also all the training required. You have to train and retrain many of them. And more importantly, this is the game changer, the change management. Change management is not about changing the management. Change management is change how we do things. And the buy-in is very, very important. One of the key driver of the asset management, which we achieved when I was in Underwater, is going down at the head of department level, going to the operations managers level, going down to the supervisors level. Everyone have to change their habit on how they do things, and this is what is called change management. And that process took a long time, and without that, it will be a failure. So the change management is a key, towards improving asset management in your organization. So make clear the expectation or the outcomes, the desired outcomes, and also have clear monitoring mechanism. Remember the SMART, which I mentioned about. It must be, realistic, and it must be time-based. So if you take a typical asset cycle, since we are talking about the water companies, we start with gate -1 normally. Gate -1 starts with decision whether a new asset needs to be created, for supply of water to say a particular new housing scheme. So that's where the gate -1 starts, whether you can actually use the current assets, or say, for example, you want to develop, say Putrajaya is not there currently, you want to build a new township called Putrajaya. Okay, Putrajaya is already there. Maybe say Putrijaya. We want to create Putrijaya. We want to supply water to this Putrijaya. We start with gate -1. So what will you do first? So is there sufficient water for us to supply to this new township called Putrijaya? So asset planning and creation is very important. So the guys who are actually working in the planning side, the design side, and also the operation side, have a clear strategic objective plan, which incorporates all the current asset, and they'll say, okay, there's sufficient water to be submitted, or you have to create a new asset. And then they also look at what's the impact on the current operation and maintenance, whether it's aligned to their strategic asset life cycle, and also the risk of the current assets deteriorating and ending their whole life, and what are the new assets to be disposed, what are new assets to be created. So in a very simplistic form, this is the life cycle of an asset. So the enabler starts with the clear policy, organizational structure, the clear policy, objective, and then asset planning, and then acquisition and disposal, performance, communication, and then reviews, and then of course audit. Audit must always be tight for enabling a clear asset management program. So if you take simple 10 steps to start for, say the water company, start with the asset registry. You can start with anything, simple, then you build it up over time. Then condition of the asset itself, what are the tools which is required to actually support this, the systems required to support this. And then you got the effective effective life remaining, efficient life remaining. Sometimes the asset can be stretched, but what is the efficient life of the effective efficient life of the, or you call it in simplistic form, residual life of the current assets. So that you have to actually also list down and look at, if you look at this one from a vehicle point of view, say a water tanker, it's very straightforward. The water tanker is already 7 years old. It can be stretched to maybe 12 years. What are the components which needs to be replaced? Whether it's commercially better to replace or repair. That's just a very simple example. Likewise, it will apply to every other component of the asset, from the equipment level, bolts and nuts, right up to the treatment plant itself. Then you got the asset evaluation. This is very, very crucial. We need to know the value of assets tomorrow when all the water companies are already corporatized, or there's a value, FL, SL, linking to your business plan, and also your financing, raising of funds and so on. So this is a collateral which needs to be properly recorded and be valued. Many a times, many of our water assets we inherit from the developers. Sometimes it's not in the book, zero value in the book, but that's the asset which is actually bringing you income. So you have to actually record it somewhere. I will talk about asset valuation later on. We need to know all the performance levels. This go without saying, at the treatment plant level, at the equipment level, and so on and so on. We need to know the criticality of a particular asset to the business. Say if this one valve fail, how will it affect the business itself? So we have to mark all the critical assets and also identify the criticality of all the assets to the business itself. That needs to be linked. And then we also have to have a strategy of the root cause analysis for all these assets within the asset management framework plan. Then you also have to have the OPEX and also the CAPEX strategies, the funding strategies, and also the the overall end result of your asset management plan. So I'm talking about today a simplistic asset management plan. But to get here, you have to go through all these 10 steps. And to go through these 10 steps, this seems easy, but when you start doing, there's lots and lots of things which needs to be improved. And so the journey will take some time, but you are not starting from zero. Many of your companies, if I go to say Majlis Bandaraya Subang today, Majlis Perbandaran Subang Jaya, say that, have you got an asset management plan? They will say yes. Okay, tell me where are you in the plan? Then they will start struggling to answer. Then when I go into detail, tell me the condition of the drains in section 20, whatever, they will fall. But if they got this great plan here, anywhere in here you ask questions, they should be, then we can actually certify them as a good asset management company or organization. So this is very simplistic. The journey is long, but not too difficult. But when I say long, 1 to 3 years is achievable to get a clear asset management program. And when you got a good asset management program, your business plans are very simple. I just take 1 or 2 samples from overseas. These are construction companies with good asset management plan, where there's a potential of cost reduction from the initialization of a project right up to the operations through proper asset management plans. And this is actually an example from Costain. Many of you know a big, large contracting company in the UK. They have financial measures, they have business process measures, people measures in terms of safety, in terms of staff retention, training, and also customer measures. So these are some of the examples which are actually tracked to the asset management balance scorecard. But to get to here, you have to start somewhere, and the journey to get there will take, and maybe when I'm talking about in 5 years' time, if you started today, can go into very much detail on all these components of the asset management itself. So how do we get started on asset management? So start with identifying key drivers, start with data collection, prioritize, information sharing. Information, although is you got this PDPA and all this business intelligence and tools, you have to identify what are the information which can be shared, because sharing of information is caring. And if your stakeholders in particular doesn't know, so if you go to a typical housing scheme, they see a water tank there, but they don't know what's the capacity of the water tank. They don't know who operates this water tank, who is responsible, whether it's breakdown, which was last service. I think all that information must be made when you go into a detailed asset management at the gatehouse. There's some charts, and some good organization, they got a billboard to actually show the information sharing. And this is what is missing grossly in our current utilities, including our water sector. Knowledge, transparent strategy. Transparent strategy means you must share the strategy so that they know, hey, this one in 5 years' time we'll get a new treatment plant or upgraded capacity or more reserves or whatever. These pipelines, these asbestos pipelines will be replaced in 3 years' time. This is part of the strategy. The long-term planning, life cycle analysis, decision-making tools, risk identification. So you have to list down, and then you have to actually go into details of what you have, what you don't have, and how to build it up over time. The key drivers is what conditions the asset have to meet, what are the customer expectation, what is the regulator driver. The regulator today, our regulator is not at par with Ofwat yet, but you have to learn from elsewhere, benchmark your organization, and then set your own target. You may be ahead of regulator target if cost is not an issue. If cost is an issue, at least you know where to draw the line and balance between the current regulation and the future regulation. And then you have to also look at all the economic and the financial drivers, which needs to be clearly quantified. Data collection, is central to all asset management, need to be accurate. You cannot say that's just a valve. You must know what is the model, what is the make, when it was installed, what is the lifespan, when was last service, a lot of accurate data. Data should serve as a purpose required for the analysis and must also be included in the upgrading plans as well. So if you look at volume 2, the section 25, there's a brief write-up on conceptual asset management system module. Now I'm going to the system. In the system, it starts with strategy and planning, and then it talks about decision making. It talks about asset life cycle, asset information. It talks about organization and people, and also risk and review. So I'll touch a little bit on all of these. Not much is written in volume 2, but as I said, you are lucky today. I'm in the mood to share a lot. So, you gain by just listening. So strategy and planning, you have to start with a clear asset management policy within your organization. Do you have an asset management policy? If you don't have, you start. The asset management policy should be signed off by the CEO and the manager, who is the head, the leader, who is actually going to drive this asset management plan. And then in the policy, you have to outline the principles and the requirement aligned to the organization plan, provide a clear framework. You must have a clear organization of asset management within the organization. I will show some examples later on. Approach. What is the approach in developing the asset management plan and the roles of the various sections and the organization. Demand analysis. Analysis for the future requirement as well. The strategic planning and the processes to be undertaken for strategic asset management plan, and also the eventual plan itself. So the decision making, will have to be framework, have to be based on the data which is required, and all the other things associated within the asset itself. So these are many words here. I do not intend to actually read out the words. I want to go through actual journey. You can actually read this later on. The tool includes the capital investment tool, operation investment tool, the life cycle, and also the shutdowns and operating strategy, and also a strategy for the aging assets. Once you got all those data in the previous slide, you can actually lead towards answering all these questions in here. So, and this must be supported by clear guidelines, technical standards and legislation, asset creation. There must be guidelines for that. System engineering, maintenance, delivery, shutdowns, and so on and so on, including incident response and reporting, and also rationalization of some of the assets, including disposal. The information and knowledge strategy must be a key to the asset management plan itself. The knowledge standards, asset information systems, and the data and knowledge, all this needs to be stored somewhere, which can be accessed by the user to actually operate the asset in the best of the knowledge, because sometimes you need to actually repair this piece of stretch of pipeline which keep on bursting. So from this knowledge sharing within the organization, within the asset management tool, he can actually go in and there and see, they have a lot of things which also link to the GIS and also the maintenance record. From there, for example, he can actually identify when was the last break, and what was the reason, and how it was repaired, and what needs to be done, how to fix it, and so on, as an example. So this knowledge sharing within that asset database is very crucial, so that he don't have to go around and look for hard copy papers, look for people who have retired to ask when was this last line repaired. From the system, everything is there, transparent, clear, so that the next guy who takes over you can actually drive it through smoothly. Organization and people, some of the components of the asset management needs to be also linked to the suppliers, because when you talk about routine maintenance, you talk about spares, you talk about, contracting, so in the asset management system, there's things which are also linked to contracting, transparent contracting, maybe you have term contractors, suppliers and so on, leadership within the organization, also the culture which I mentioned just now, and also the competence and the behavior. If someone say this is public asset, ini bukan hakku, we normally near very often hear down the line, ini rosak tak apalah, you have to make them accountable, and the only way to make them accountable is having a clear asset management plan. That's why the organization and people is actually very, very important. And of course, some additional consideration here, I talked about the movable assets, the vehicles, the tools, equipments, and so on. Immovable assets, the land also you have to value and keep records, some of the pipelines, what we have, we know, what we don't know, own, sometimes we don't know. So we have to actually build up, not today, but over time, at least in your radar, all these are actually in existence. Few are purchased by somebody else, you don't know, some appear in the book, some not in the book, so all this needs to be built up over time, and then the value needs to be identified as well, so that when you want to replace or you want to repair, now I go into risk. Risk, this is a very simplistic risk management, from strategy, identification, analysis, planning, and implementation. But actually, the risk and review for asset management lies with these 8 critical things. Identification of the risk itself, the system related to health and safety, the accounting practices also related to the risk in asset management, the contingency planning, assets and system change management, stakeholder relations, sustainable development, and also the management review and audit assurance. I'll show example of risk, as we go down, and then eventually with all this, what I explained just now, you will lead towards the total asset management system features, which can go down into even flow level, maintenance record level, and your SCADA system surveillance level, and so on. So these are the additional features, and it can be very interactive, including it can be interactive with the financial and economic models. You can, from the asset management system, you can create your financial system to be linked for your operation budget, your annual budgets, your capex budgets, and so on and so on. Okay, how do you value assets? There's many ways. If you look at the international practices, they talk about very different way. Sometimes is organization specific, sometimes is regulatory driven. So in the case of water assets, there's a choice in here, because we still have not come into total asset management as yet. Some of the choices to be considered are as follows. You can value an asset based on historical value. Historical value means this is the estimated initial cost of the land and construction cost of the asset. Say this water treatment plant costs 100 million ringgit. So that is the value of the asset. But over time, the asset depreciates. You have to put in a lot of formulas there, and you have to look at the effective, efficient life of the asset itself, and then you have to value the asset for you to make a decision whether to replace, to repair, or to build a new one, or to refurbish. The second way is to look at the depreciated value in your books. You call it book value. This is the depreciated value of the asset based on the assumed rates of depreciation for non-land assets. So this is accountants are very familiar with this. The third one is another simplistic value, theoretical value of the asset. This is the theoretical cost of providing a new similar asset, like-to-like replacement. Say, if this treatment plant is very complex and very big, Okay, I take a treatment plant. The treatment plant say it costs 100 million. Tomorrow, if suddenly a bomb falls down on the treatment plant, the treatment plant is no there. So what will be the value of the asset? So to build that plant, like to like, that 100 million 20 years ago today might cost 500 million. So that is the value of that asset today for you to provide the services. So that value needs to be booked somewhere within the asset management framework to actually justify certain things. So this is what they call it. That's why identifying the value of asset is very important. Or a modern equivalent asset value. This is the theoretical cost of providing a new modern equivalent asset today as a replacement cost. Or you got the actual asset value. This is the value determined by conducting a condition-based assessment for all the asset types. And then the sixth one is, which I like to use this as the asset value, because in the UK they use this RAV, regulated asset value. This means the determined by whoever, most of the time is by the regulator. This is the determined value of the asset utilized by the service licensee in providing the services. So this is a more realistic valuation of the asset. I will show you some examples of the various type of asset for the sewerage industry, which also is applicable to the water industry, and how this actually relates to the overall asset management and also the risk. So PS 55 and also the ISO 55 always use this principle of PDCA. Everyone is familiar with the PDCA, plan, do, check, act. So in the PS 55 structure, they talk about asset management policy, which is crucial, strategy and objectives, and then they talk about the enablers, and then they talk about implementation strategy based on the life cycle, and of course, the performance and the management review. So this should be the steps in starting off, and if you're not starting off, you're actually doing it to further improve your current asset management strategies and plans. So of course, in PS 55, if you look at volume 2, this diagram is there. It's a very comprehensive system. I just put this as a to display that as an example. Maybe another talk will go into the details. This is very, very comprehensive. It just suffice for you to know that it actually quotes a lot of clause in the ISO itself, and by following this clause, you as a custodian of the asset, you will know in fingertips what is the asset, what is the condition of the asset, why do I need X amount of money to replace it, how long the asset can live, how much I need to actually raise funds for moving so forward and forward. With this one simplistic management tool, you can be a key custodian of the asset. Now I like to put this thing because ISO 55000 is not industry specific, it's generic, it applies to any industry. Today we talk about flooding. Every time it rains, we complain about floods. So we cannot live with floods all the time. I mean, if you go to do civil engineering, the basic fundamental subjects are hydraulics and hydrology. In hydrology, they talk about the water cycle, they talk about the rain flow, the intensity, the duration, the prediction, all that. With so many thousands and thousands of engineers in the country, we cannot keep on blaming the rain and the high water seafall, high water rise of the sea. Surely there's many ways. So if we have a comprehensive asset management of our national drainage system, including all the feeder drains, including all the local authority drains, and these are all inventorized. When I say inventorized, the condition of the drain, the capacity of the drain. We know that this one cannot take this heavy, intense rainfall. Through the asset management plan, these are the bottlenecks, these are the ones needs to be replaced. I think we won't see flooding in Malaysia. it's sad for me as a, I talk from the point of, when I was in City Hall in the, in the late 80s, I was made responsible to manage drainage within City Hall, and what I did is, I came up with a simple paper called Back to Basics, and that paper was presented to Cabinet, and part of the paper, was to take over responsibility of all other agencies within KL, because we got the Akta Ibu Kota. We took over the responsibility with regards to drainage. We took the full responsibility of the managing the drainage system. And my back to basics went to back to asset management. That means identifying all the drains, putting, identifying a clear inventory, knowing the condition of the drain itself. And one of the conditions which is massive causing the drainage system is the silting up and also the rubbish in the drain. So we actually, started cleaning up all the drain. All incoming drains to the main river systems are being screened with proper maintenance system 24/7 and start dredging the main rivers. For 4 years subsequent to where I put up the plan, KL was free from flooding. So I talk based on an experience as a trained engineer, experience as an regulator, as a asset owner at that time, City Hall, and also I'm also a flood victim, So when every time it floods and I hear people blame the rain and the high seawater rise, I feel so sad, And I always relate to many countries. Our nearest country is Singapore. The same rainfall which falls in Johor falls in Singapore. In Singapore, you don't talk about evacuating people because they have fantastic asset management plan in Singapore. They understand all the drainage system, they know the capacities, they know which are the bottlenecks, they know what needs to be upgraded, they know where the storage system required, and so on and so on. So this is what we require for a drainage system. Likewise for the roads, so much of traffic jams every day is, if you are traveling to work, I feel sorry for you. The jams are getting worse and worse. So there's so many agencies in charge of the roads, traffic control, including police and so on. So again, asset management on road management system, traffic management system is very crucial. Likewise you can always use this ISO 55000 for that. Likewise for our industry, water, this is an excellent tool, if you go through in detail, to actually overcome all the current issues. This is the organizational strategic operation within the organization. You start with your strategic plan, with your policy, with your strategy and objective. I'll show an example later. And then I talked a little bit about the critical asset, just one example here. Critical and non-critical water mains, for example, you have to actually really identify, this is an example I took from the UK, identify the risk associated with the critical assets, and then link it to your risk management profile. And then that's where you will actually look at the action plan on what are the non-critical water mains and what are the critical water mains which needs to be addressed. For example, here, the older cast iron, and the clay oil, soil pipes, how many percent you have still balance is the probability of breaking is very high. So this is something which you actually need to pay attention to. So all this will be linked to your asset management system, which will give scores, and you will get. And there's also other means, inputs from your pipeline condition, your system operation manual, and so on, linking up to your proper information system, which will link to your overall asset management system. Other complexity in asset management includes, pipe pressure, concurrent compliance target or new stringent targets, to be met, and also the scale of catchment being, widen or reduce, or and so on, and maybe there's also some specific operation requirements which needs to be incorporated into the asset management system. These are all just samples, not for you to memorize, but suffice for you to know that asset management is not just what the 6 pages written in the volume 2. Asset management is very, very comprehensive. It's a science on its own. although you see a lot of management decision, but that science can only be affected with clear management system. And asset management system is really an art to actually manage any kind of utility to solve whatever asset related problems we have in an organization, in a country as well. I mentioned to you traffic, roads, floodings, and so on and so on. So you will have also for the asset itself, what you call service and structural grade metrics for you to identify and put it into your risk management system. These are just some examples. You can also focus on waterways, on properties affected, on the number of chokes, the number of reactive maintenance required, and so on to be linked into your future asset management systems. And this is an example I took from Arup here, the strengths and weaknesses. This is actually how do you actually justify the maturity of your asset management system, the maturity of the asset. So there's a lot of components which needs to be pulled, and part of these are all being picked up already in the ISO 55000. So I show you one example of an implementation strategy from the start to the finishing stage. So the preliminary task, stage 1 is to identify the asset, use your whatever information system you have. If you have a good geographic information system, that's better still. Then lay out all your strategies, and then your asset management roadmap. Then year 2, this is start with year 1. If you are starting with year 1, you build up your asset management system and with basic data, develop the system and procedures, policies, strategies, objectives, and change management. You start doing up. In year 3, you have your simplistic asset management plan at the generic one, formulated based on a high level plan with OPEX and CAPEX decision making, profile risk management, and also data integrity. Year 4, maybe you go into the detailed asset management, total asset management terms, which I demonstrated. You have a lot of other components, and then eventually you have a corporate image, improve image, reduce cost, and increase revenue with good high level. That's why I put a frame of 5 years, and in the water I did within 3 years. But the normal time frame taken is about 5 years. But this 3 years was more on at the operational level. Then it actually went up into a corporate level in the 5 years. Tenaga Nasional still very much struggling. They have done ISO 55000 for some power plants. But as an organization overall, I think they are still also halfway through in their journey. Still a lot to be done. So water utilities, you are somewhere in between here. You surely can catch up, and these are just some samples. In year 1, what you need to do. I'm not going to read out one by one. Suffice for you to know, you have to have a roadmap. You can customize your own roadmap. You have to get the management buy-in, identify a team. Put up all the steps needs to be taken, and then in year 2, short-term goals. What are your O&M and CAPEX decisions, and then some of this is already in your in the volume 2. So I'm not going to read what is in volume 2. I'm more interested in actually telling how to actually do it. In the 3rd and 4th year, maybe you can start looking at going into a total asset management system with all these additional tools, and then year 5 onwards, you look into the long term, and you can then become like what the UK water companies are, asset management plan. You just Google and look at one of the asset management plan of the UK water company. Theirs are very, very comprehensive, and it's all linked to their financing, they're raising the bonds, the investments, and also the tariff, and so on and so on. It's very, very comprehensive. All that driven by the asset management plan. So to do the ISO, of course, this slide I prepared some time ago. So assuming you're studying in late 2022, so you start an awareness training program, and then you engage a few internal auditors, and then you do an internal audit, and then you do a review, and then you set a time frame, maybe in a year, to actually get your ISO 45000, and then you can integrate that with your management system, integrated management system. I'm sure many of you already have the 45,000 or the 9,000, and the 18,000. So you can go for IMS later on. And better still, if once you have this good asset management system, you can actually link it to all other management tools, through a good integrated system. You can also view in your mobile systems or iPad or your mobile phones, operation maintenance dashboard, complaint management systems. You got the integrated VMS, vehicle monitoring system, and complaint management system. You can see where your vehicle is, what they are doing, how long they were there, are they moonlighting, all that, through a very good asset management system. It's part of managing the assets itself. And also mobile application with field mobility, like for example, there's a breakage there, you can straight away put a red mark there and say, I'm repairing this. This is a standard price. I've given an instruction to a contractor because it's causing havoc to the consumers or to the public, and I'm fixing this. So it is actually a fantastic tool. So in summary, it's not my conclusion slide yet. In summary, asset management is top driven, but you have to be built up from the bottom. Risk management is important. You have to identify all the risk profile associated to the asset. Of course, the plan, do, check, act is the cycle, and business driven by asset management will be aligned, systematic and transparent by optimizing value of assets while taking into consideration sustainability principles. So using the ISO 55000 is the right way moving forward. I got about 10 minutes left in my talk. In 10 minutes, I'm going to go through another 20 slides, just as an example. I'm not going to go into detail. I'm going to share with you an actual case study. This is a real life study. I was 100% involved in this. So hence I'm quite free to actually, share the experiences here. And you are lucky that you're getting this shared, just as a knowledge, So this is sewerage asset, and I was responsible for the national sewerage assets. In actually managing the national sewerage assets, if I put this is not created or what do you call that, fiction. This is through a real brainstorm. We mapped out this mind map. I led this together with my team. I put the sewerage assets. Sewerage assets includes everything from the treatment plant to the pipeline to the pump station to the whatever I mentioned just now. And then start mapping out the regulator, the resources, the risk, the change issues, the procurement issues, the IT issues. And with all that, we start mapping out many, many things. And from here, we start building out why we needed to go to an asset management system. So in the case of IWK, in the Water Consortium, being a national sewerage company, we are moving from the operating regime to an asset management company. So from previously just looking at not clear and visible directions, we started somewhere, and then we moved into very strategic objective, very clear and holistic. If you go and ask many of the aduns, whether it's opposition adun or even the government aduns, when you talk about public complaints, the easiest they will say to deal with is IWK. And I have personally been in contact with many of these local aduns, nationwide. If there's a complaint to the utility, IWK will be the first to respond. At least last few years, at least the last 10 years, 7 to 10 years, practically because of the asset management tool. Because if the supervisor or the operator at the bottom there don't take action, the thing will escalate within the timelines. Within, it will go up straight to the management level, and I, being the chief operating officer, it will go to me, and they know if it comes to me, they will be in trouble, and they will discipline themselves. That's where the change management actually took place. They discipline themselves to actually make sure that they fix complaints on the spot. They even reply emails on the spots. So that's how the vision have actually grown, over time. And all these slides I'm just going to touch. They have a clear roadmap. The roadmap is with the policy, strategy, objective, plans, and moving towards an asset management plan over a time frame I mentioned just now. They have a clear policy endorsed by the board, signed by the CEO, and placed in all the operating units, even at the treatment plants. And in the policy, they have put all the whatever trust. And this is organization specific. You can come up with your own policies, definition, and trust. Then you come up with your strategy. Plan 1, what's your plan? What's your do? What's your check? What's your act? And then you come up with an assisting manual, a manual to actually assist the staff on how to actually manage these assets. So there's a manual for this, also designed in-house. Of course, we also get the assistance from some consultants. Here we used Wally Parson. They are good in oil and gas. We took some ideas from there to actually develop these manuals. And then organization structure, I mentioned in my earlier talk. There must be a very strong steering committee led by the C level, whether the CEO or COO, and then the committee, in the steering committee, all the heads must be there in there. Then there must be also various working groups. This is just an example. You can have your own, but it is more or less a generic. If it is not top down, if you start from unit level, it will fail. And then asset management steering committee, these are the things which they will look at, leading towards their final goal, roadmap, all this being endorsed by the steering committee. And then they will actually get inputs from all the supporting sections. And the steering committee is normally led by the C level. In the case of Indawater, I was the steering committee chairman for many, many years. Drove the entire asset management nationwide. And today at many unit levels, they have every year before they submit their business plan, they have to submit the asset management plan as part of the business plan, and then only submit the budget. So they have a very, very structured way on how to actually come up with their annual budget. And when they go for a new budget, they will always fall back to the previous year budget, and we can easily identify where they didn't perform and why they didn't perform, and if action needs to be taken, that will be the tool used to actually improve the organizational behavior. So these are some of the strategic. This is related to the pipe itself, sewerage pipe choking and so on, just as an example. And then how to build up capital works program. Planning is actually everybody's responsibility. Planning, the government also have a responsibility, the regulator has a responsibility, the service licensee, and also the facility licensee. Likewise, financing also, government needs to fund part of it, facility licensee have to fund part of it, and also the service licensee. Likewise for the capex, So we have to actually identify this clearly so that you map this into your asset management plan, and then you justify what needs to be funded capex by the government, what needs to be funded by the FL. In government, you talk about grant or whatever, and then FL by the bond of the soft loan or whatever, and then funded by the SL, what are the things. So in Indawater, they actually got a very clear planning strategy, which actually maps out all these mechanism. And then when you come into the actual capex plan, you got a clear roles and responsibility defined. So when we put up a plan, they will link up to whether this should be government funded, this should be funded by the FL, this should be funded by the service licensee. So our justification becomes important. But currently, all these tools, what we use, in the water, as you know, is still, operating as an authorized person. Although they have a concession, the concession is supposed to end in 2034. The company, although it's a 100% company, currently is owned by the Government of Malaysia through Minister of Finance Incorporated. Now, all these plans, this asset management plan we use to actually justify to our key shareholder, which is the Government of Malaysia, not to the regulator, previously, to the Minister of Finance to get our tariff increase or the subsidy. For whatever reasons, the government feels that is the subsidy is in the form of compensation to compensate whatever the operating shortfall. So these are the tools which have been used through good asset management plans. And all this we also learned a lot from the UK water industry. So we also have a lot of progress reporting. These are just samples, and then we have got also a corporate KPI, which actually puts certain targets to all the units and the heads, HODs, to compile the movable asset, whatever. And then these are some of the samples of the KPIs. And these are example of the risk identified. These are some of the sewerage assets. You can see here, STP, risk associated with theft, risk associated with structural defects, risk associated with settlement, failure, overloading, whatever. So all this, is being categorized, and this is an example. In 2018, I think. In 2018, at one point of time, total risk identified is 1,748. So here, then we actually relook at the risk based on the operating unit officers, and you find that Shah Alam unit has the highest risk. So when you distribute funding, you know where to distribute the fund, and based on the type of risk. Sometimes the risk is numbers are high, but the risk might be the cost to fix this risk might be low. So that's why we tie this with the cost required to fix this risk. You got the pre and the post. So the unit will ask for a budget. The unit will try to justify, say, for example, this is the Klang unit. They said the current risk is this. If I get a budget of X amount, I will reduce in the coming year to this, the risk. So the management, people like us will look at all this and say, hey, no, you relook at this and so on and so on. We use this tool to justify the budget and the funding. So the risks are also marked as red, amber, and green. Red is very critical. So you can see that some of them, although the risks are so high, the rate is actually low. So this funding will go to this first, and then the not so high risk, there will be a lower, that's why sometimes people who speak loud get the more money, So, but here we actually go into a very structured way on how we distribute funds or we raise funds, And then we also link this risk to the spider web here, based on regulatory risk, customer risk, commercial risk, and then by investing these funds, and reducing the number of risks, we see whether we'll bring this red line, which is current, to this line or not. Then we will do all sort of tests here to justify the disbursement of the funds. So you can see how asset management is very much linked to the business plan. And that's why in the UK, I mentioned, they don't use business plan, they use asset management plans in their, annual and 5-yearly projections. So asset risk can be linked linked to the asset itself or to the operation of the asset. These are all the examples I showed just now, and then you come into the total risk, and then you identify the weightage and all that. All these are just examples. All this will be linked into the total asset management tool, system which I mentioned just now. And then you will have all this sort of scorecard. From here, based on the unit office and all this, you can then decide whether to hold the risk or whether to escalate the risk for some to be approved, or to revert back and say, you go and fix the risk. You already have enough budget, you can go and fix it. So the management at the high level, they don't have to go to the ground to understand. Everything is already in the fingertip. They just go and do spot checks. They can actually go and audit the guys on the bottom. And even the management go to parliament or to whatever cabinet meetings or whatever, we have data in fingertips. We can answer most of the questions very confidently. So these are the beauty of the asset management system. So principles of learning, I'm not going to go through. Let's now give you some examples. In the case of Indawater, physical assets, they got land, they got civil and structural, they got M&E, they got sewer. The land is calculated based on the land area size and location. CNS is calculated based on the asset type and PE. PE is population equivalent capacity of the plant. The M&E is also calculated based on the asset type and the PE. The sewer line is calculated based on the material, diameter, and also the length. I'm just showing an example very quickly. Okay, I remember I showed you historical value, depreciated value, current theoretical value, modern equivalent value, and also actual asset value. If I put those costs, the total value of asset managed by Indawater, this is about 5 years ago, is about 15 billion. The land itself is about 6 billion, and then followed by civil structural, sewer lines 3 billion, civil structural 3 billion, and then M&E equipment. You can see, so land most of the time. Why land is important for Suresh is because some of the smaller plants, land can be rationalized, and then you can decide what to do with the land later on, whether to give it back to the government or to redevelop it for new future sewage treatment plants and so on and so on. So if you use depreciated value, you can see from the historical value has gone up. With the current theoretical value, if even higher. Modern equivalent value, if you got to replace it, this is the value. And of course, the actual asset value, I talked to you about the regulated asset value, is the, you can see that the sewerage asset nationwide, is about 20 billion. But in the books, there's no asset value. And there's another topic to be discussed later on. It's many things associated to it. Which likewise for the water companies, if you start looking at all your M&E equipments, your bolts, your nuts, your models, your whatever, you can start developing this value curve. So you can see in here, for decision making purposes, you can see that this is the sewer line worth 15 billion. The CNS 7 billion, this is in 2017, M&E 4 billion, land is bought, and then replacement cost. You have to decide what is the monetary value you want to actually use to raise or whatever. And we also look at the optimum RAV value, and then you draw a curve, and then you decide on your budgeting, your operating costs, and whatever. So, as I mentioned, in concluding, these are, it looks simple. It looks like asset management is just identifying the asset and so on. But you can see that this building up of this brings you to a business intelligence, and it is very powerful tool for any utility, not only for water, like I mentioned, railways, ports, airports, you just name it, power plants, any utility, it's a real powerful tool. And in conclusion, asset management benefits many parties. The service industries, of course, reduce wastage, additional revenue, enhance image, economic returns, sustainability, service delivery. The infrastructure itself is less stress on the infrastructure because what are the infrastructure which needs to be paid attention upon, and you become more efficient utility. The user and the consumer, high satisfaction index, better quality of service. You also can attract FDIs and also value proposition, and new businesses to come in. As a country, as I mentioned to you, rains heavily in Singapore, the same duration and intense rains falls in Johor Bahru flooded. Singapore is still, drained, despite Singapore being surrounded by the sea, and the sea also rises likewise in Semenanjung, and we study all the tide levels and so on. So the country's image is protected. So all the investors and all that, they come here because they know that they have showcased good governance on their infrastructure with very good asset management, and of course it promotes the economy. So with that, I conclude my presentation. If you are with asset management, you are with me, so you will never walk alone. Of course, from here I'm a hardcore Liverpool supporter. Though we are losing, but don't forget we are still one of the big champions. So here I like to champion asset management as a way forward for all utilities, not only for the water utility, but more so water utility being not sustainable. I think moving towards asset management plans will be a good move forward. With that, I've passed the time of 4:30. I pass back to the organizer, MWA. I'm quite happy to answer any questions if there's any to answer.
Thank you, Prof. Hanifa, for the extensive presentation, and I hope everybody have benefited from today's presentation by Prof. Hanifa. So I see from the chat box there's no questions. So anyone who want to verbally ask Prof on the subject matter?
There's no question. Either they get they understood, under us. Maybe next time you have to give a small exam assignment. Any questions?
Okay, maybe we can switch on our camera. We can know each other, and then maybe can ask questions before we conclude. Prof, it's okay to close your
Stop share.
Your off share.
Okay.
Okay. And by the way, I also have posted some of the upcoming programs by MWA. You can see in the chat box, and more details can be obtained from our website. And also those who are members who are in the WhatsApp group, you will also get the information. Okay, I guess there's no question, bro.
Tak ada.
Tak ada.
Saya bercakap, tak ada question. So I'm sure the slides are actually quite clear. Anyone wants the slides can get from Cik Johari. Of course, without the real example, you can just send a note to Ruby or to Johari. I got the PDF version without the actual real example. So if you have questions, you can always communicate with me through emails or whatever later on.
Maybe, sir, I have one question.
Yeah. Okay.
I was thinking about how I'm Lisa from Laku Management from Sarawak.
Yeah.
I do have question that from your experience with Indawater, right? So how do you identify or manage the ghost asset?
How do you manage?
How do you manage and identify the ghost asset?
Okay, we start with the brainstorming with the units. Okay, say Laku, you got many district officers, all that. Before the district officers come to the main corporate, they have their own brainstorm. To do the brainstorm, they come up with a guide. What are the things? And then we also ask them the basic asset related questions. The condition of the asset, number of complaints, your budget, all that. So we got a set of whatever guidelines. They use the guidelines to brainstorm, and then they will escalate to the heads of that units. They will come to the HQ. In HQ, we will grill them, 2-3 days or what, and then they will go back, and then they will come back, and then they'll come up with whatever finally agreed. Now, once that's the agreed plan, then we have a monitoring system. Some of it will be linked to their KPI. Some of it will be linked to their officers' KPI, right up to the operator. everyone has a KPI. So when come to year end, the corporate KPI, when you decide incentive or increment or bonus or whatever, is the individual KPI multiplied by the unit's KPI by the company's KPI. So they cannot escape. Everyone has to perform. So that's a tool which we have developed. Of course, the tool is continually being improved with time. We don't want to make it too complicated because everybody will be chasing KPI, and the danger is if anything is not in KPI, the focus might not be focused. So we try to actually balance. That's why the balance scorecard, I showed you some other examples just now, Costain and so on, needs to be looked at as well. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Liza. Any more questions? Done, Prof.
Okay.
Okay. I think any last word from you?
Hope it was beneficial. And as I mentioned, this is not industry specific. Asset management is applicable to all utilities, all organizations, who actually manages physical assets. Even if you take a simple convention center, say KLCC or whatever City Convention Center, if they have good asset management, their asset will bring optimal benefits to the owner. So that's my concluding remark. I definitely see a lot of benefits for the water companies, though the chapter is small in volume 2. Maybe MWA can come up with a new publication. Mr. Lee is around. Mr. Lee can take up that as a challenge for the coming years. Asset management module. Okay, with that, thank you very much, and wish all of you the best.
Thank you, Prof. Hanifa, and thank you everyone who has participated in today's talk. So before we dismiss and before we leave, can we take a group photo? Can you just switch on your video, please?
Nanti share gambar, tak ambil.
Okay.
Boleh. Nanti kita ada upcoming event. Okay. So ready?
Oh, Mr. Tam pun ada.
Okay, ready?
Haji Kamarudin ada.
2, 3.
Yes.
Haji Kamarudin buat accept kat Pakistan.
Not yet.
Okay, itu saja.
Alright.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Prof.
Okay, thank you. Assalamualaikum.
Assalamualaikum.